You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy, coming to you from Portland, Maine. This is Tim the Nerd, and joining me in the seat next to me, we have Her Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty okay. I had as you know, Tim, a largely frustrating day, but it ended well with delicious pasta that I made and being able to sell the rowing machine, which means we can get a kitchen table. So that's nice. But yeah, it was like one of those just, I don't know, it almost makes me be like, okay, what the fuck is in retrograde right now? Because I feel like every time I have a weird day, there's like some retrograde something or other going on that my ex-neighbor didn't get the opportunity to tell me about. Because I'm not sure if I ever mentioned that on the show before, but before we moved to this Portland, when we were still in Portland, Oregon, we had this spiritual worker, and I swear to Christ, like every time she warned me, like, just so you know, Mercury's going into retrograde, you better look out. And then just everything would be shitty from people. And it was like, I don't know if she accidentally programmed me for that, or if there's like a legitimate thing there. However, I will say there's a few times now that I don't live next to her that I feel like it's been the other way around. So, I don't know, maybe after the recording I'll get curious and be like, what went into retrograde today? Because something's fucking with me. But yeah, like, at least it ended better, though, than it started.
Indeed. And also, physically, you are doing better as well, because you've been dealing with a cold.
Oh, yeah, and I think that was even something I said to the Mr. Reverend, was he had asked me to pick him up at 4, and I was in the middle of and I vented to you about it earlier, but since it's an active work thing, I try to leave that stuff off the show. But, I was just having tech support frustrations. At that point, I told him, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come get you, but just so you're warned, I have a hardcore case of the fuckets right now, and I will try really hard to, like, reel that in by the time I pick you up. Because, nobody wants to be picked up by somebody, like, in a bad mood, right? Because that shit is contagious. Bad moods are more contagious than good moods, fun fact. And it's actually, like, a psychological, like, social fact between us humans. But yeah, so I tried to listen to some good music and go pick him up. But I did say that it didn't help that I've been sick for like the last few days with like this horrible head cold, because a fun fact for the uninformed out there, gestationally speaking, apparently being pregnant can make colds just worse and shittier. And it's funny because it reminds me that I'd had this thought for a funny, like, TikTok video. Because, see, nobody ever talks about the first trimester shit, because in our culture, you don't talk about your pregnancy during the first trimester. And I'm calling bullshit, and I think it's because nobody wants to hear us complain about all the weird stuff that, like, happens to your body. But yeah, like, whenever I first got pregnant, I remember I got, like, stuffy nosed out of nowhere and, like, super sensitive to, like, the pollen counts. And that was, like, one of the things I had discovered was because of the hormone stuff. It can make things worse. And lo and behold, it does the same thing to colds. So this is just, like, one of the worst head cold, chest cold things I've ever fucking had. But I do think it's finally almost gone. I'm sipping my herbal medicine right now, my awesome honey stuff that I make every year for cough and cold season. So I'm slowly getting better. I can actually make it through a sentence and not have to like really have to like draw in the air like I'm struggling for life.
Yeah, I remember when I was sick one time and recording an episode of the show, like, I cringed listening back on it with the amount of times that I was sniffing. And also, too, with your cough, my throat was starting to hurt based on how, rough your coughing was. Oh, yeah,
I know there was one time, because, we normally record earlier in the week, and Tim was like, I can hear your cough. You want to put it off another day? And I'm like, yes. So I'm doing better. I can still kind of hear it, But I am feeling a lot better, at least. What about your week?
Oh, my week has been good. Still getting used to Maine. What I've been loving more than anything else since coming here is the solitude that I've been having as well. Like, compared to the past couple years, I didn't realize how much I needed that right now. Just the ability to just like lay back and not really have to focus on anybody else and just relax. That's been nice. But one thing that I've been keeping my eye on is the whole Twitter mess.
Oh, God, yeah. Elon Musk is definitely messing up a lot, it seems, right now with this.
Yeah, just comically so. And, I mean, if there's one thing I detest, it's people of means, whether it's, financial or, based on their profession or something like that, who are just utterly fucking selfish. Like, he bought Twitter at $44 billion by taking out a bunch of loans and, like selling stock from his other companies when apparently Twitter was valued at about $27 billion. So basically, he didn't really want Twitter in the first place.
Right.
It's just Twitter called his bluff.
Very loudly tried to back out of the deal and got told by lawyers, no, you have to buy this now. You said that you would, and now you have to. Yeah. So, and I almost wonder, because of that fact, like, is he trying to tank it on purpose?
It doesn't, an arrogant person like that, I can see him thinking maybe that would be a good idea, but he has so much financially put into Twitter now that, if that tanks, that's also going to affect his other businesses as well. And, just seeing people like that, people who are so arrogant that, they think the world is owed to them, and they don't worry about things like consent or respect or anything like that. I found my new jam in life, and it's seeing people like that get their comeuppance, and it's been so wonderful seeing him just fumble and fumble and fumble, and seeing the advertisers just leaving in droves, like the whole nonsense of, allowing just anybody for $8 to get a check mark, allowed a bunch of people to do parody accounts of like weapons manufacturers and health insurance companies.
Yeah, I think we talked about the insulin thing. I think that had happened before last week's episode, right? Did we talk about that on
No, we did not talk about that on the show.
Okay, yeah, because that was one.
There was a fake Eli Lilly account that said, guess what, folks? Insulin's free now. And the Eli Lilly company plus some other medical companies that make insulin just tanked like over $300 million. Same with the weapons manufacturers. So, like, he's digging such a hole. And he, apparently, is pissed off the Twitter employees so much that a huge amount of them staged a walkout.
Oh, yeah. And then he's actually actively making them quit now, kind of. There was this weird thing he did with a deadline of basically telling them, you better be ready to work your asses harder than you've ever worked, or take 3 months severance paid. And you need to decide by Thursday. And I guess a lot of people went, okay, money please. Like, I'll take the walking papers. You have fun with this shit show and whatever it's turning into, right?
Yeah.
But I still think probably one of the funnier parody ones that crossed my eyes was the Nestle one, where it was talking about, stealing your water and selling it back to you, haha. Like, some people are kind of using it to make points rather than do things like, hey, free insulin.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, is it possible that Twitter can survive all this? Sure, anything is possible, but, I think this has really kind of soured that social media site on a bunch of people, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
Oh, me neither. I mean, we were kind of starting to get over it anyway. I think you and I had both, effectively turned off our accounts. And, I don't even know if I deleted mine. I just know I was pretty much done with it.
I deleted, the only Twitter I had at this point was the show Twitter, and I ended up deleting that because, I'm not saying that for a pat on the back here, folks. It's not a virtual signaling thing. It's just, one, I wasn't using it, but two, once he got on board and I saw some of the changes he was making, it was like, I just don't need this nonsense in my life.
Yeah, I think the Reverend Tracy is still up there. Like, I haven't haven't actively deleted the profile. I did remove it from my phone just because I wasn't using it, and it'll suggest getting rid of stuff every now and then nowadays, because, it wants you to have room to download more shit. But yeah, Twitter, I think, is going to be funny to watch for a little bit. And Elon Musk, whatever you're doing out there, cowboy, have fun. I don't know what his goal is, but it seems very, very much like I don't know if he's either purposely tanking it, or he should probably hire some people to help him.
Or something, because it just, wow.
There was one tweet or something that I saw from supposedly, I didn't look into it, but they were claiming that they were one of, the coding engineers, I think is what it was. And they just I just wanted to confirm that he knows absolutely nothing, and we laugh at him daily, or something like that. It was chuckle worthy, but yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see how Twitter do.
Yeah, because basically he did away with a bunch of stuff that Twitter had in place, only to find out why they had them in place. Like the check mark and all that. But anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about another shit show here. We have some more results. The Democrats have officially kept control of the Senate. However, the Republicans have officially regained control of the House with a razor-thin majority. Not by much at all. But
not what they were expecting. And even historically speaking, not what was expected.
On average, the opposing party usually gains about 28 seats in the House. And sometimes more. And this time, the red wave some were anticipating just was barely a trickle.
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't really do much.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like we mentioned last week. The Republicans are already talking about doing investigations, and knowing their history with investigations, I am very skeptical that anything of substance will be brought out. But like we mentioned last week too, if they do happen to find some wrongdoing in there, I will fully support the book being thrown at the people who did whatever. But again, they just have a long, long history since the 90s, at least with Clinton, if not longer, of just making a show out of this stuff, just for political points. I mean, because it worked with Hillary Clinton. The Benghazi stuff definitely put questions in people's mind on whether they should elect her in office. So they're thinking, let's do it again for a guy in Joe Biden, who's going to be in his early 80s when 2024 runs around, and who already has a pretty low approval rating as it stands, and who in 2020 wasn't even most Democrats' first or fifth choice.
Right, and he's not even planning on running again, from what I understand. From what I understand, he's definitely leaning towards running again, but just again, he's going to be in his 80s. I think it is a valid question to ask whether we should put somebody in their 80s in office. Right. I think that would be a mistake. This is just my humble opinion. But I do worry that is this really what the best you guys think you got? This is the only one that you think you can beat Trump, because he beat Trump one time, you think he'll beat him again. Which, speaking of that, I guess we can segue into that fun announcement this week.
Yeah, Mango Mussolini made his announcement that he's running again for president in 2024, and conservative media, wow, they came out against him so harshly. I mean, on the one hand, it is really good to see that you have people finally opening their eyes, or at least getting the cojones to be able to step up and say, hey, no more of this nonsense. But who knows what's going to happen over the next couple of years, I guess. It's just knowing how vindictive the Mango Mussolini guy can be. It'll be interesting. I mean, the Republicans' best hope is that the Department of Justice comes out really quick. And speaking of that, they did announce a special prosecutor that the head of the Justice Department put in place for this, impartial person. So, it will depend on when Trump is done away with.
Yeah.
As to how that will affect both the GOP primaries as well as the election in 2024. But Overall, though, I will say, in a way, I was heartened by this election. Because I don't see it as a victory for Democrats as much as I see moderates and a good number of Republicans stating, we don't want this insanity anymore.
Oh, yeah, because at the very least, the biggest thing that came out of it was, a lot of the folks that Trump endorsed lost. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like, from what I was reading, that the general stance of the Republican Party, the GOP, was that they almost kind of seemed to blame Trump for those losses. So it'll be interesting. It'll be really, really interesting to see how this plays out. But it was kind of funny because the Mr. Reverend and I were at lunch on the 15th. And we were talking about whether or not he would announce, because some of the other buzz in the air, and this goes into what I was saying with kind of blaming him for backing them, is there's about to be this runoff in Georgia. And they kind of were hoping he wouldn't announce, because the general feeling I got from what I was reading was that they were hoping people would forget that he endorsed Herschel Walker. Is that right? Okay, because that's right. It's Herschel Walker and then the Reverend guy. And we'll be bringing that up with this topic today, since it has very much to do with something we're going to be talking about. But, I told the Mr. Reverend, is let's be real, he's going to announce. His ego can't not announce this. He's been talking about it. He's been spinning up for it. This was his big day. It was going to be the 15th. He's got to make a big announcement. And he had literally nothing else to give them. This was not a Kofefe moment where he could deflect it and make people guess what he meant.
But the funny part, though, is that when he made the announcement, I guess the speech went on for so long that people were getting bored and tried to leave.
Yeah, and they wouldn't let them.
The doors.
They wouldn't let them leave. And, some people, honestly, as soon as he announced, you could see in the crowd them going, no, and, shaking their heads and trying to go at that point as well. Not even so much that he was long-winded about it, but just, I don't think this is what a lot of the party wants. I think his supporters at this point are few and loud, and definitely not the majority. And I think the election shows that.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that for once, for the first time in a long time, we'll actually have a good Republican candidate up against, I guess, Biden. But we shall see. I know DeSantis has talked about throwing his hat in the ring. I don't see him winning the Republican ticket. So I would be very curious to see if he ends up running as an independent instead. But this is what we're going to see over the next 2 years until we lead up to our next election special month, where we talk way too much about stuff that we are educating ourselves in, because that's just kind of how it works.
I mean, if I had to predict, unless he's going to prison, he's going to try and or has major health problems, hopefully, he's going to run. He's going to not get the GOP nomination, but I could easily see him trying to run as a third party.
Yeah.
And he speaking of his base, he does have a sizable chunk of the population that would literally fall on a sword for him.
Oh yeah, that's why it's unfortunate because, and not that I'm wishing ill on him, I want to make this very clear.
I am. No, I'm kidding.
But it's that's what it would take to not end in riots. Mm-hmm. Would be basically him having a heart attack, which he does, his diet and his body type has him as a contender for. Let's be real about that. He doesn't exactly take care of his health. I mean, for fuck's sake, the man believes that your body runs on a battery and that if you work out, you're losing your battery faster. That was something I remembered reading at some point. Did he really say that? And I went and found the article. I was like, oh shit, he actually believes that, or he says it anyway. But even then, you'd probably get met with, he was murdered. You know what I mean? That base is just such a fanatical base. But it goes back to they're few, but they're loud. There's a lot of them, but it is not the majority. And I think this past election, these midterms, helped really reinforce that feeling. You know what I mean? For anybody who is that worried about it, it's not most Republicans, not all of your Republican friends are yay, Trump. And even if they used to be on Team Trump, people can change their minds and grow. And I think after the clusterfuck that was how he dealt with things while in office, the fact that he never even fully staffed his staff the entire time he was in office, it really turned a lot of respectable Republicans away from him. And so I will always be a fan of going back to having the respectable Republican base and not this, what I felt was just clown shoes craziness that went on that led up to all of this.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, you can't let tribalism blind you to that extent to where you think the other side, all of the other side is the enemy, because that is not the truth. Yeah. I mean, there will always be a divide, people thinking one way and a group of people thinking the other, but, you know, we have had a long history of people just coming together, talking it out, compromising, and doing what's best for the country. Yeah. And, again, I think in a small way, this midterm election did show that, I think the majority of this country is ready to get back to that.
Yeah, I think a reputable third party would help because, I mean, even you were talking about with kind of the political theater of it, I think at this point both sides are guilty because anytime, and we were talking about this before we started recording, but anytime somebody wins an election, the other side is, it was stolen, we need to impeach them, and I would love to get away from that. Because that, to me, is kind of a crime against our political system. Not literally, but just figuratively. I would love to see a third party because I think that would help stop that.
Or at least ranked choice voting. The more I read on that, the more I wish that were nationwide. Basically, it's like you would have a list of, my number one choice is this, my number two is that, and that would make it a lot easier to... yeah.
I had it this year in Maine. That was my first time I got to do ranked choice. I had never seen that before, and I was like, wait, first choice, second choice, the fuck is this? And so, did my best with that. Granted, there was one that I just really, literally wrote a note next to that said, absolutely not. And I didn't even put them in the ranking. I put, other, and, I think I put something of, oh God, it had to do with something in his little blurb. He was a young kid, and he was saying something about, the radical leftists, or it was the radically woke, or something like that. And so I put my third choice as a write-in of a different radically woke person, or something like that. I don't know. It was the one part of my ballot that I fucked around a little bit with, because that child, because he was definitely a younger kid, just everything about his website, everything about his blurb that was in the voter guide, just rubbed me absolutely wrong.
People like that. But anyway, let's dive into our main topic this week. Let folks in on what that is. Yeah,
so this is something that I kind of feel a little bit strongly about, that I wish we would talk a little bit more about and possibly discourage, and that is mudslinging. And for you folks at home that don't know what that is, another term for it is negative campaigning. And now, we didn't find our traditional pro and con article like we normally find through procon.org. But what we did find was a Wikipedia article that has a good chunk of advantages and a good chunk of disadvantages. So we're going to kind of, chunk those out. We're going to talk about a paragraph or two at a time, read it, take a pause, discuss, and continue through. But, it'll be a little bit differently formatted than our normal show, because we're just going to go through all of the advantage paragraphs, and then we'll switch over to Tim, because he just really wanted to be the negative one today since I was on a tear all day, and then he'll take over for the negative sides. But yeah, like I said, it's something that I want to talk more about, because unfortunately in human psychology, we do tend to glam onto negative things. We glam onto warnings, because that has gotten us through so many iterations of evolution and surviving, from don't eat those berries to you got to cook that pork, things like that.
Or in social media. I mean, the algorithms are in place to make you mad in order to leave a comment and to come back.
Exactly. And we've talked about that before in other topics where, eliciting anger and negative emotions is more likely to get a response than positivity, unfortunately. But it just has everything to do with how our brains are wired. So in my head, this is all part of some of the stuff that I call political gaslighting. where they're not trying to give you information, they're just trying to get you to vote a certain way. And so that's just to top off the show with the Reverend's humble opinion on negative campaigning. That's why overall I don't like it. I don't think it's actually giving information when you're just trying to really manipulate somebody into voting how you want to vote. And I think what's awesome is we kind of have some cool example of that going on right now, with the runoff going on in Georgia and some of the campaigning styles between those two candidates.
Indeed. Like Goofus and Gallant. No.
Yeah, it's Warnock versus
Herschel Walker.
Walker. So
yeah.
Warnock and Walker. The Reverend Warnock and Herschel Walker, the football star.
Indeed. And also with Wikipedia, it should be pointed out, Wikipedia is not something you would use for like a school source or anything like that, but it is great for something like this, starting conversation, which is what we try to do with the show here. So
Exactly. And plus, also, to put it out there, Wikipedia has changed quite a bit. You can't really leave anything on there that's false for a long time. I know people used to have fun about going and like putting completely made up stuff about celebrities, for example, but now they have so many people kind of moderating it and mediating it. Granted, it's not to the tune of Psychology Today, where they have professionals that go through and put their name on it, but there are a lot of people that vet this information, check this information, and try to make sure there's not a bunch of garbage on there. So I do want to give Wikipedia some credit for its evolution over the years. I do remember when it first came out, though, it was absolutely not acceptable to use in papers, but you have to take that with a grain of, I graduated high school in 2003, y'all. So, I mean, we're almost coming up on 20 years ago, so they've grown, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, you're making me feel old. Like 3 years from now will be my 30th high school
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out if I've got a reunion that I'm supposed to go to or blow off. I haven't decided yet.
For me, like, I don't make enough money for them to, send me the invitation. So.
Well, when you come from a place like Farmersville, Texas, they're just glad you came in and got something at the gas station, because they're happy that you remember where it's at, I guess. The tornadoes didn't blow it away yet. That only happened to one of my schools. Not all of them. So, I'll just go ahead and dig into the first two paragraphs of advantages.
Let's do it.
So, advantages. Sponsors of overt negative campaigns often cite reasons to support mass communication of negative ideas. The Office of National Drug Control Policy uses negative campaigns to steer the public away from health risks. Similar negative campaigns have been used to rebuke mass marketing by tobacco companies or to discourage drunk driving. Those who conduct negative political campaigns sometimes say the public needs to know about the person he or she is voting for, even if it is bad. In other words, if a candidate's opponent is a crook or a bad person, then he or she should be able to tell the public about it. Martin Wattenberg and Craig Brains of the University of California, Irvine, considered in their study whether negative campaigning mobilizes or alienates voters. They concluded that data used by Stephen Anselabir wow, I should have proofread. In a 1994 American Political Science Review article to advance the hypothesis that negative campaigning demobilizes voters was flawed. So, I mean, I guess it's interesting that it kind of makes sense when you put it that way. Like, right? Like, we want to warn people of bad things. And that even goes back to some of the evolutionary stuff, right? Like, we should warn that driving while drunk increases your likelihood of getting dead while driving. Mm-hmm. Like, we should share that. And I think my problem is sometimes the crook, the bad person stuff seems to be a little bit made up. And what's interesting is this feeds right into what I was just talking about with Warnock versus Herschel Walker, in that, oh gosh, Herschel Walker's got him a background, okay?
Yeah.
And it's found guilty stuff. I mean, that's not even going into whether or not he actually did insist that a woman get an abortion and then tried to get her to get a second one, apparently.
First one didn't take.
Well, I mean, the first kid was aborted, but I think she wound up having the second one is what happened.
Okay.
But that's what I mean, was a second one, like, a second pregnancy had occurred. Smartass. Anyway. But, so it's interesting because right now the campaigning war between those two, now, Warnock is a reverend. And so when he's on the stage, he is not talking about Walker. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to do that. So it seems to be his campaign manager is the one that's bringing up this stuff about Walker. But Walker, on the other hand, is openly bringing up alleged things, which is different than a found guilty thing. So, yeah, it's like, oh, well, you need to know that he's a crook and he just got away with it. And then it goes, but did he? Like, did he actually get away with it? Because the big thing in the room is Walker has been found guilty of domestic violence. And Walker's team is saying that Warnock did commit domestic violence. So that did make me curious, and I looked into it. And what I did find was, I guess, either his estranged ex-wife, or possibly she was still married to him technically at the time, claimed that he ran over her foot with his car. And basically it wound up being dropped because the police it was unfounded. But this is one of the main things that's being brought up against Warnock, who is already a senator. He is running as an incumbent. He's re-electing. So I just, whenever I was trying to compare the two, because I have family in Georgia. Now, my interest in this is very limited because I can't vote. That's literally out of my control. And I'm not going to sit here and try to tell people how to vote. But when you hear stuff, or at least when I hear stuff, it makes me naturally curious. So it made me want to look into it. And it was really interesting to be like, okay, so if we're comparing criminal background here, one is definitely a thicker stack of paper than the other one. So it's interesting because the whole you're a bad person doesn't necessarily mean that that person's actually bad. It just means that that person who's telling you they're a bad person believes they're bad. Even when there's not concrete proof, right?
Yeah. And you know, the paragraphs did make a point that if we're talking politics, if the political ad in question is pointing out a legitimate negative, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because when you vote, you want to be able to suss out this information to, you know, make the right choice. You know, I think back to 1988. There was an infamous ad that the Bush campaign put out against Dukakis in regards to a gentleman by the name of Willie Horton. He was a rapist and a murderer, I guess, who ended up with a weekend furlough. And during that furlough ended up causing some more crimes, you know, which legitimate point to bring up. I don't have all of the specifics here, but that's still something that, you know, if you're voting, you'd want to look into. But there was a political strategist by the name of Lee Atwater that worked with Bush, and they made an ad about this. And the ad was, you know, it was infamous for its racism, because it showed it showed these prisoners walking through a revolving door. All of them were white except for one, and the one black prisoner was the only prisoner that looked up at the camera and gave a dirty look. You know, okay. So, you know, when I think of negative ads, you know, I think I think of that because, you know, they took an issue that would legitimately, like if there was a candidate that was, somebody said that about a candidate I was considering supporting, I would look into, but the ad in question was just ridiculous. Yeah.
So the next paragraph, just to go through these. A subsequent study done by blah, blah, blah. that name again, and Sola Behir, I think, Sola Behir, and Shanto Iyengar in 1995 corrected some of the previous study's flaws. This study concluded that negative advertising suppressed voter turnout, particularly for independent voters. They speculated that campaigns tend to go negative only if the independent vote is leaning towards the opponent. In doing so, they ensure that the swing voters stay home, leaving the election up to the base voters. They also found that negative ads have a greater impact on Democrats than on Republicans. According to them, base Republicans will vote no matter what and will vote only for a Republican. But Democrats can be influenced to either stay home and not vote at all, or to switch sides and vote for a Republican. This, combined with the effect negativity has on independents, led them to conclude that Republicans benefit more from going negative than Democrats. Other researchers have found different, more positive outcomes from negative campaigns, though. Rick Farmer, PhD and assistant professor of political science at University of Akron, found that negative ads are more memorable than positive ads when they reinforce a pre-existing belief and are relevant to the central issues of marketing campaign. Researchers at the University of Georgia found the impact of negative ads increases over time, while positive ads used to counteract negative ads lack the power of negative ads. Research also suggests negative campaigning introduces controversy and raises public awareness through additional news coverage. And so that goes back into, they said negative campaigning tends to stick, especially if it's already confirming something you already feel. That's called an anchor bias and confirmation bias. Like, those both fit in hardcore there. Mm-hmm. Now, that is really funny, the part about the Republican, though. Like, because, some of the people I've talked to don't really give a hill of beans about Walker's background. They're kind of playing that this is some great redemption story, and where's the Reverend talking about being redeemed? And I was like, well, what if he's got really nothing to redeem from? Yeah. Like, that's not really particularly great for, somebody who doesn't have that much of a redemption story.
Yeah, and it is disconcerting to hear, too, that you will have people that will vote that blindly no matter what.
Yeah.
Ideally, in a perfect world, people would vote for the best possible candidate at that particular time. I mean, I'm a pretty progressive, but have there been times in the past I voted for a Republican? Sure.
Yeah.
But
it is kind of funny that base, who also tend to go negative, you should care about this criminal background, but yet they don't care about the criminal background on their own person.
Jesus.
If it's the bad guy, but their guy's not the bad guy. It's kind of... So that part's interesting. So the last little bit on the advantages here. Kyle Matz and David P. Ridlowski, in The Positive Case for Negative Campaigning, showed through surveys and experiments that negative campaigning may provide informational benefits for voters. Without negativity, voters would not have full information about all of their choices, since no candidate will say anything bad about herself, which is interesting that they went with a female there. They argue that candidates have to point out the flaws in their opponents for voters to be fully informed. Most recent research distinguishes between a dichotomous, positive versus negative, and graded conceptualization of negative campaigning. The latter accounts for differences in the strength of negative communication, which is something I feel like I've already brought up. It argues that positive, i.e. information about parties and candidates, and derogatory, i.e. democratic disaffection, effects of negative campaigning will depend on the strength or intensity of negative campaigning. Similarly, political candidates and parties have found to adapt the strength of their negative messages during election campaigns in order to preserve the chances for post-electoral collaboration in countries with frequent coalition governments.
Yeah, and I don't know, call me crazy though. If we are talking a legitimate ad that is pointing out a legitimate negative for another candidate, I don't necessarily view that as a negative. It is serious. It is just saying you don't vote for this person because X, Y, and Z. We're not talking about the hyperbolic stuff. We're not talking, they're a socialist or any crap like that. We're talking ads that do point out legitimate bad things that another candidate did. And by bad, I don't mean criminal. I just mean, like take a politician that puts something into law that negatively hurts the economy. That is a negative, but that is still something that should be pointed out. To me, the negative the negative ads, the negative campaigns are the ones that are just that are hyperbolic, the ones that are, throwing out nonsense, whether it's something that has a sliver of truth or something completely made up like Mango Mussolini stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my problem is half the time when it's negative campaigning, I feel like they've cherry-picked like a quote and are just turning it to make it sound really bad. Mm-hmm. Like another example also kind of happens to come out of Georgia, that I think it was like the governor or somebody there was talking about, a heartbeat. Like when a heartbeat is detected.
Candidate for governor, that was Stacey Abrams.
Oh, yes, okay. So she was saying that it's not a heartbeat that's detected at 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And of course that got my attention, right? Because what did I hear then,
Like,
right?
oh, no, you did.
And so what I researched and found out is, in spite of what you think about that candidate, there is argument in the medical community. Is that cardiac activity or is it a heartbeat? Because the heart is not technically fully formed yet. So within the medical community, which she is not a part of, but follows to a point, they can't even agree if that's a heartbeat or not. But the way that it got displayed was, she's evil. You know what I mean? She doesn't believe that babies have a heartbeat. And it's like, that's not at all what she said, but rather she was just expressing that there is a good chunk of medical professionals who agree that that is not technically a heartbeat. And you have to also keep in mind that the whole reason in the context that she was bringing that up is that there are states that want to make like the heartbeat laws, where basically you can't get an abortion once a heartbeat is detected. And now half the time, some women don't even know they're pregnant yet until it's at that point. So that's more of where that came from, but because of how it was used and they could pull the quote and make it sound like she's cold or evil or wrong, that's how it got used. And I think that's my big beef with negative campaigning, is it's really manipulative.
I think another thing, though, too, I mean, just the more you've dived into those paragraphs there, I think the bigger problem comes with the fact that most people don't do what you did.
Right, you don't check it, but we should, right? Like, that goes into when I read something and it makes me feel, especially those negative emotions, right? The anger, the sad, the scared, because those are the emotions that is even being used in marketing to get you to buy things now. That makes me insanely curious. It triggers me, but it triggers me to look into it more. And that's something that I do genuinely wish more people did. But because they don't, these negative twists on otherwise just facts, not bad facts, not really bad guy stuff, like, continues to get twisted in this way. Because they're basically taking advantage of the fact that people are going to take it from this source and not look any further.
Yeah, because the Stacey Abrams thing, what you found out is that it's a complicated issue. There's a lot to it that cannot be fit into a 30-second ad. And yet most people are going to be watching that 30-second ad and base their decision either left or right based on that ad.
Oh,
and
especially the emotion of it, right?
Yeah.
Because, that even got my attention, being somebody that's having a baby. So, what was cool was I learned something, because I had no idea that there was a dispute in the medical community. But again, why does that make her bad for believing something that a good chunk of doctors also believes, So, to me, it just goes to the negative campaigning is a little bit of a stick in my side, because I don't think we're just listing, here's the things they did. We're not just listing, here's the things they voted against. Now, I do respect those. Like, hey, they voted against this and pro this. And I've seen that before and looked into it on candidates, and they've actually openly talked about changing their mind on a topic, which, isn't being covered by that negative campaigning, but at least that's closer to the truth than taking a quote out and trying to make it sound as bad as it could sound.
Oh, the 2020 election. I mean, you had, during the Democratic primary, you had Democrats that were going against Biden, that were going back to positions that Biden held in the 70s. Trying to present it as if he felt that way today. And it's like, no, you don't get to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway. Do you want to talk about risks?
Yeah, let's talk about risks.
Let's do it. Risks and consequences. Since I'm the negative Nelly of the show this week, let's talk. All right, some strategists.
It's okay, it's my word. I'll take the easy word.
Some strategists say that an effect of negative campaigning is that while it motivates the base of support, it can alienate centrist and undecided voters from the political process, reducing voter turnout and radicalizing politics. In a study done by Gina Garamone about how negative... What is it with the wacky names this week?
They have fun names. There's no cookie.
Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't say much because most people mispronounce Jousma. Is it Jousma? No, Jousma.
Google thinks it's Jousma, by the way.
The Turks. Anyway, about how negative advertising affects the political process, it was found that a consequence of negative campaigning is greater image discrimination of the candidates and greater attitude polarization. While positive ads also contributed to the image discrimination and attitude polarization, Garamone found that negative campaigning played a more influential role in the discrimination and polarization than positive campaigning. Negative ads can produce serious backlash. A disastrous ad was run by the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada in the 1993 Canadian federal election, apparently emphasizing Liberal Party of Canada leader Jean something French Partial's facial paralysis, which was caused by Bell's palsy, in a number of unflattering photos with the subtext of criticizing his platforms. Mr. French Guy took maximum advantage of the opportunity to gain the public sympathy as a man who struggled with a physical disability, and his party's subsequent overwhelming victory in the election helped reduce the governing Progressive Conservatives to 2 seats, along with losing official party status. And, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it does fall back on... Most people are not taking the time to do a deeper dive. Most
right.
people, and having said that, I mean, think of, lower middle class or poor people. I mean, people who have to, work 2 or 3 jobs. It's not like they have the time to, get official Senate records and read through laws that were proposed or whatever. A lot of times, most people only have the ability to get their information via either the news or via political ads or maybe the newspaper these days. But, the past 20 years has shown that not many people are reading that anymore. But that's still not a good thing. I mean, I think I think the voters in a perfect world would educate themselves more than what is being spoon-fed to them.
Right, and because more people are having things spoon-fed to them by whatever their talking head is, they're not weighing that against other opinions, and so basically they're being played. They're being played to vote however the person you listen to most wants you to vote, right? Because that's what it's kind of turned into now, is we have less of just trying to inform and more of trying to actively manipulate, which is where this plays in. Even the first part of the paragraph you had read about how people react to negative advertising and the fact that it can alienate centrists and undecided voters, or, like what they just said in the advantages, which to me was not an advantage, it just happened to be brought up in there, was, independent voters tend to be really off-put, and they're the ones that kind of get screwed out of this one.
Yeah.
Right? Because not everybody is like me that is going to go and check when they hear stuff, right? Like, people have a lot of stuff in their day. Not everybody is a political nerd. And so they just want to take in enough information so that they can feel somewhat confident in how they vote. And, I've questioned for several years if one source of information was ever going to be good enough for that, because of how it's become the media market. And they're trying to get clicks, and they're trying to get you to watch, and they're trying to also convince you to do the thing that they want to do, because it's basically just marketing with a political spin. Yeah,
I mean, news is more so a business than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, thanks to stuff like cable news, it is unfortunate, but let's dive deeper. A couple more paragraphs here. A similar backlash happened to the Liberal Party in the 2006 federal election for running an attack ad that suggested that Conservative leader Stephen Harper would use Canadian soldiers to patrol Canadian cities and impose some kind of martial law. The ad was only available from the Liberal Party's website for a few hours prior to the release of the attack ads on television. Nevertheless, it was picked up by the media and widely criticized for its absurdity, in particular the sentence, "We're not making this up. We're not allowed to make this stuff up." Liberal MP Keith Martin expressed his disapproval of whoever the idiot who approved that ad was, shortly before Liberal leader Paul Martin, no relation, stated that he had personally approved them. The effect of the ads was to diminish the credibility of the party's other attack ads. It offended many Canadians, particularly those in the military, some of whom were fighting in Afghanistan at the time. In the 2008 U.S. Senate race in North Carolina, Republican incumbent Elizabeth Dole attempted an attack on Democratic challenger Kay Hagan, who had taken a small lead in polls by tying her to atheists. Dole's campaign released an ad questioning Hagan's religion and included a voice saying, "There is no God," over a picture of Kay Hagan's face. The voice was not Hagan's, but it is believed the ad implied that it was. Initially, it was thought that the ad would work, as religion has historically been a very important issue to voters in the American South, but the ad produced a backlash across the state, and Hagan responded forcefully with an ad saying that she was a Sunday school teacher and was a religious person. Hagan also claimed Dole was trying to change the subject from the economy. The ad appeared during the Great Recession. Hagan's lead in the polls doubled, and she won the race by a 9-point margin. And
Plomp plomp.
yeah, I mean, if you go extremely ridiculous, generally voters will kind of see through that, as the examples showed. But you look at how things have been, since 2016. It's more and more crazy stuff's happening, so more and more people are willing to believe some of the crazy stuff that you see in ads like this. So that does show the danger of stuff like this, and the danger of citizens not taking that extra step to even do something as simple as reading the voter guide.
Yeah. And I guess, it's funny because I am from the South. I am OG from Texas. And it's something that still confuses me as to why religion is supposed to matter so much in these elections. Right? To me, what the fuck does that have anything to do with what that person is going to do in the seat?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and I guess there's some arguments of, well, we see Christians as more morally sound, right? Because they even pointed out that it's in America land that we care more about this. Because I think it's kind of nice that there are examples that aren't from America. There's a lot more Canadian examples than American examples in this article, which I appreciate, because we're so used to our stuff that I think we're almost desensitized to it at this point.
Yeah.
So it is kind of nice to see examples where it's working or failing in other countries as well, and where it kind of has a bad backlash. But yeah, I find it incredibly interesting how much we focus on that. I mean, even again, looking at this runoff in Georgia, it's the battle of the God men. And it's, Herschel Walker saying that he's had a massive turnaround versus the Reverend, who is a reverend. That's what he does. He still teaches at his church. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me is, even though, you would think the religious South would really love a reverend being in the seat versus a man who has the history that he has, but because of the color of the sticker on their little I voted thing, or, their lapel, the religious folks tend to think that you're only going to get true religious candidates from Team Red, from Republicans. And that's not true. I know several Democrats who are religious. This weird stereotype that's kind of been really ingrained into our political arena is that Democrats are atheists, that Democrats are godless, and if you're godless and if you're an atheist, you therefore don't have that sound moral thing. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, it kind of makes me think of this meme that I saw once. It's but if it's taking a threat of forever hell and fire to make you a good person, are you really a good person? But yeah, no, there's a lot of really awesome, ethically good and sound people who aren't Christians. Just like there are a lot of non-ethically sound people who are. That exists in both worlds. So I don't think necessarily touting the religious line has ever been enough for me. And maybe that's because I have kind of been, I've endured to a point some religious trauma. And so I very much have had my personal eyes open to the fact that just because you say you're a Christian does not mean you are going to be good to people.
Oh yeah, and think about other religions as well. I mean, there are Muslim politicians that are just as religious as Christians, and just as good of people as Christians, but in certain parts of the country, not necessarily in just the South, in certain other parts of the country as well. Having that Christian label put on you is important, unfortunately, and I think a lot of that does fall back, thanks to the work of the evil scum like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, they were two of the people really responsible in terms of injecting religion and tying it to Team Red, for their own means. But let's wrap up the paragraphs here. Because of the possible harm that can come from being seen as a negative campaigner, candidates often pledge to refrain from negative ads. This pledge is usually abandoned when an opponent is perceived to be going negative, with the first retaliatory attack being, ironically, an accusation that the opponent is a negative campaigner. While some research has found advantages and others have found disadvantages, some studies find no difference between negative and positive approaches. Research published in the Journal of Advertising found that negative political advertising makes the body want to turn away physically, but the mind remembers negative messages. The findings are based on research conducted by James Angelini, professor of communication at the University of Delaware, in collaboration with Samuel Bradley, assistant professor of advertising at Texas Tech University.
Guns up! Sorry.
And Sung-Young Lee of Indiana University, which used ads that aired during the 2000 presidential election in the United States. During a study, the researchers placed electrodes under the eyes of willing participants and showed that a series of 30-second ads from both the George W. Bush and Al Gore campaigns. The electrodes picked up on the startle response, the automatic eye movement typically seen in response to snakes, spiders, and other threats. Compared to positive or neutral messages, negative advertising prompted greater reflex reactions and a desire to move away. And, think of the example I brought up earlier, the 1988 political ad. I'm still talking about it, because it was that memorable. It was that negative, and, even as a kid, just seeing that was just like, that is wrong, but it's memorable, unfortunately. And,
yep.
I think the grand lesson from all of this is that voters need to educate themselves.
Well, I mean, if you want to take it seriously, if you're going to be the type of person that hears something about somebody, ever, maybe do a little bit of due diligence and look into it a little bit further.
And if it's confirmed, great.
Yeah. I mean, and that's not even just politically speaking. I mean, that's even talking trash or hearing trash about somebody like as a coworker, or if you're in college and hearing, somebody just being talked poorly about. You are allowed to investigate and decide. Mm-hmm. I mean, and granted, that comes from a little bit of a personal experience, given kind of something I went through. I was that person people were being warned about for a little while at my alma mater. Which, by the way, the guns up, that's a saying from Texas Tech football, from the Raiders. So if anybody heard that and thought that was something weird, it's just because I used to go to a lot of their football games.
Yeah, we don't have weapons here.
No, I don't have a gun yet. Not here anyway.
Yet.
Well, I mean, I've got one that a friend wants to send me because I am a Texan at heart, so I got to have a piece, right?
Right.
But yeah. I mean, it is ultimately up to us to vet and research things. And I think a lot of that requires being willing to do a little bit of more shadow worky type mentality with stuff and getting away from things like glamming onto anchor bias or confirmation bias, right? Mm-hmm. Because we heard kind of a lot of that today. Like, if you hear a negative campaign that solidifies you not wanting to vote for somebody, you're going to glam onto that harder than hearing the same thing about a candidate that you already wanted to vote for.
Yep.
And that's something that I feel like I have experienced from some family talking about the stuff in Georgia. Because to me, it's kind of amazing that, you can sit there and say, well, but, he supposedly domestic violenced his wife, too. Meanwhile, the other candidate that it sounds like you're planning on voting for most definitely did those things. Held a gun to one of them for sure. And it did get alleged that he held a gun to a second one as well. And it is on record, apparently, that he, threatened to have a shootout with police at one point. But, so that's what I'm saying is, it's interesting to me that the same folks that are saying, yes, but the Reverend supposedly did these things, and are so willing to vote for somebody who definitely did the other things. And it goes to just my humble opinion that redemption story or not, I just happen to believe that sometimes you do things that takes you out of the ability to do a certain job.
Yeah.
Like, if you're found guilty of certain things, you should never be put in charge of children. Like, that seems to be something that we understand, right?
You rob a bank, you don't need to work at a bank.
Exactly. Like, we get it to a point, but it seems to be when it comes to politics, that kind of goes out the window depending on who you want to vote for. And maybe that does kind of feed into the whole anchor bias concept, which, by the way, Google anchor bias.
Yep.
Google confirmation bias. Like, I don't think you guys necessarily need us to teach you about those things. The information is very much out there, and it's very much related to a lot of this. And if you don't know how to challenge your biases, you might be drinking somebody else's Kool-Aid.
Yeah, and we're I mean, but it's, and you've already mentioned it on a previous episode. I mean, we definitely have plans in the works to have an episode about biases as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that'll definitely be interesting to dive into. But folks out there, if you're listening, whether you're on Team Red or Team Blue or somewhere in between, challenge yourself. Don't get spoon-fed. Don't be guilty of being spoon-fed, because it can happen to the best of us. You know, there are plenty of people on Team Blue who are being spoon-fed information by, MSNBC or wherever. And you got to challenge yourself. You have to be able to take the time to study the other side, to see if what is being said is true, to make an informed decision. And, I think ultimately what I've learned in all of this is that, more people need to do that.
Oh, yeah, hands down. Like, nothing will... And you'll feel more confident in your decisions, too. Which I think is one of the reasons that we get so combative and so defensive around this, or at least why certain people get so defensive about this, is almost from a place of guilt. Like, they know they haven't vetted it. Mm-hmm. Or possibly they know that there's a hypocrisy to them, wanting to vote for this person in spite of all the things they definitely did, versus not wanting to vote for somebody because of something they maybe supposedly did.
Yeah.
Because, that's natural to feel that guilt. Like, that's where a lot of that defensiveness can come from, especially when you're talking about willingly feeding into confirmation bias or anchor bias, right? So, yeah, and I guess I just meant to say, like, if you're in Georgia right now, because you're the ones that kind of matter at this point, because you're the only ones having a runoff soon, be willing to vet some information. Don't even take my word on this stuff with Herschel Walker versus the Reverend Warnick. Like, go and research it. If you really care that much about their background, if you really care that much about how much they believe in God, it's up to you to find that stuff out and kind of feel confident about what you're going into. Because I will give an IMHO right now. When I read about Herschel Walker, it kind of feels like he's only doing the God thing right now to get votes. I'm not sure how long ago this supposed turnaround was. I couldn't find anything on that specifically. I did think it was funny that somebody did bring up that, the Reverend shouldn't be condoning, like, his son speaking out against him. Or it kind of made it sound like the Reverend had ran an ad with the son. And I'm not sure if that happened because I couldn't find it. But what I did find was that the son did choose to speak out at some point, because apparently Herschel Walker is trying to say that he's all for family values, and of course he's anti-abortion, he's anti-LGBTQ rights, he's, and he he was trying to say something about being pro-family or whatever, and like these deadbeat dads or whatever, and so his son came out and said, I'm calling bullshit on this. Because not only has he not had anything to do with my life since I was a child, he hasn't even attempted now as I'm an adult. So that's where I kind of come from. Like, that to me was probably the thing that I learned in all of this that went, okay, that's kind of to me a red flag that I don't think this guy has changed as much as he said he has.
Yeah.
Because how would you not even attempt to contact your child if that was how you felt about it, right? So, I don't know. And I can't even say for a matter of fact. I'm just saying for me, that gives me a lot of skepticals being up. because I don't understand how you can claim to have a turnaround on these things and not even attempt to make things right that maybe you didn't do the way that you maybe believe now that you should have done.
Yeah. Yeah, and, you know, as the Reverend mentioned, take the time to dive a little deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, if you are in Georgia, if you take that time to do a deep dive and you still vote for Herschel Walker, that's fine. I won't agree with you, but you are still exercising your right as a citizen to vote in this country, and that, at the end of the day, is more important than anything else.
Yeah, not saying I've got enough of that pull, but please don't vote for anybody just because I said to. Oh my God, please don't. Because I've only looked into it enough because I found it interesting. I did not research to the point I would if I were the one filling out a ballot, because that's not my responsibility and that's not under my control. I'm going to accept whatever the great state of Georgia decides because they're the ones there. Mm-hmm. I just hope that people vet it more than just listening to whatever, especially if you do listen to a more one-sided news outlet. Just be willing to challenge that. You don't have to drink their Kool-Aid. Indeed, because all you're doing is making them money, and at my age, being 46 and all, I'm kind of tired of making other people money. I want a little bit of my own, you know? But I think that will wrap it up for us this week. We thank you all for listening. Did you have any final words? Oh, no, I love that Beans has been sitting here with us this entire time. I got like a cool photo of it looking like she's doing a massive recording gig. But no, I have nothing else to say. We can totally just wrap this up for the week.
All right. So thank you, Beans, for joining us this week. And I mean, it is proven, I guess, that cats, you know that computers are important to humans, which is why they always, get studious like this or want to be on your computer.
Oh, I just thought it was because she wants to be next to me.
Well, that's
she's
it. Well, that's
she's obsessed with the hormones and everything.
It's like obviously the computer is something important to their favorite humans. Yeah. So there are even toys you can buy your cat of, like a fake computer.
Oh, I know there's even apps you can get where they can like bat the fish or whatever. My uncle had that for a little while for his cat. And he'd put videos up of him playing the game. It was really cute.
Yeah, when Phil was alive, on YouTube, you just search videos for cats, and then there will be like 8-hour videos that people make in their backyard of like birds eating birdseed, and Phil used to love those.
Oh no, it's like, I'm just here for the hormones. There's some hormones over here. I'm gonna stay at this computer. I like it because when my mom talks, like the waves go up and down on the screen. that's all she's thinking. Also, can somebody feed me?
Yes, some really good food there. All right, we thank you all for listening. Each Saturday we'll have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Stay positive, folks.
Fuck yeah.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.